So it's the Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina,
Cool.
right? And like,
Yep.
what's like, so the really interesting thing there is that all of the trails are kind of like built off of just like hiking trails or walking trails. And so I guess, is it that the features are like, is it lacking berms and like a lot of that typical mountain bike infrastructure you might see on the West Coast?
Yeah, we've got a variety of that stuff. So the original trails that were here, Pisgah National Forest, and the famous Pisgah, been here for a long time. So they were developed from old hiking trails, basically. And before that, they were logging extraction routes usually. So they were old skidder paths or logging
No
roads or
way.
old railroad beds and things like that, or trails that were made to access hunting or like logging camps and stuff like that. So that was like the old history of it, and then people started hiking on them, and eventually started riding mountain bikes on them. So we've got an incredible amount of that in this area, but then there's a lot of like purpose built mountain bike trails as well. So we've got private bike parks and state park, trails that have been built, for and city municipality kind of like trail systems and things that were, built specific for mountain bikes. So then in those kinds of places, we do find those like, flow trail and berms and jumps and like optimized for, mountain bike riding. So we've got a bit of both really.
Yeah. And so I guess like one of the cues that you really focus on is the heavy or light hands, heavy feet. How do you like think about simplifying a cue down to something like that? That's heavy feet, light hands.
Oh yeah. Well, those kind of mantras are good to yeah, just establish, I guess, with your client, that little saying or something that reminds them to do the thing that you're working on. So they may require, a bit of explanation beforehand, and then you kind of distill it down to, key points, right? So then, so in the teaching progression, we might talk about, okay, what we're doing, and then, well, why are we doing this? And then, well, how do we do it? Okay, well, here's maybe a more detailed explanation of how we do it. Let's distill it into these key points. All right. So, remember, heavy feet and light hands or whatever other, substitute for that for other, other skills. Then you would give a then we demonstrate and practice and feedback and like all that sort of thing too. But that, just kind of having those little mantras, as a heuristic, I guess, for people to remember, to learn is helpful. So, um,
And I like the idea of like the light hands and like you could be on a part of the trail. I mean, I've sort of tried this too because I've always felt a little
mm,
bit better when I'm like really centered over the bottom bracket of the bike and like, so to put myself in like at a level of rider, it's like I'm probably like level 2 plus, let's call it level 3 kind of thing.
got it.
But like letting the bike do more of the riding, I feel like that's really kind of core to the way that you're teaching.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's specifically the heavy feet and light hands thing is like, why that's a thing is that if we, if I like some riders will really connect really well with learning through what things feel like. And so if you can call attention to their touch points of the bike, their feet and their hands, then that gives them cues to self teach their body position. So, we think about that centered body position where they're standing on their feet with the pedals are level. They've got equal pressure on both or equal weight on both feet. Hands are connected to the grips, but they're not pulling on their fingers or they're not really leaning on their palms. So, that position like would give you the sensation that you're well centered on the bike. All your weight is very low in the bike. It's gonna handle very predictably. If you're too far back, you would feel you're pulling on your fingers. If you get too far forward, then you end up kind of like leaning on your palm. So it's a way to self discover, what good centered body position feels like. And when you achieve that, then it just allows the bike to be a lot more maneuverable. So I guess like if you had tension in your hands in some kind of way, where you're pulling on the bars to maintain your your balance, then the bike isn't as free to move, I guess. Then it's gonna, or anytime that the bike moves, then it would also like pull your center of mass around. But if
Right.
you're on your feet, or your weight in your feet, then the bike can kind of like move a lot. without necessarily like moving your center of mass and disrupting your balance basically. So and stability. So that's kind of
Yeah,
the think about that.
I've had these scenarios where I've learned a cue or I've learned something from, a coach like yourself and like gone back out and ridden the trail and like that felt completely different. And it
Mm.
really is this like delicate balance between like doing too much and not doing enough. And I guess
Mm.
in the sort of mid ranges, like of people who are looking to find mountain bike instruction, they're like level ones, level twos, like, they're in that sort of area. Is there anything consistent or like, any themes that you see for people? Are they doing too much or are they doing too little?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like there's common themes that, pretty much everyone needs to work on. And I'd say one of the, the biggest modifications that I help people make to their riding is really if we think about a basic body position for downhill and thinking about most people will present themselves as that when they stand up to coast downhill, they tend to just bend their knees a lot and then leave their arms more straight and their chest higher. And they tend to be behind center of the bike, right? So then they're pulling on their fingers and then they're in this defensive and kind of scared mode, right? Very passive. Which kind of makes sense, right? It's like, I'm scared of something. I'm gonna like, shrink away from it and get back.
Yeah.
Like, that old the old, myths of, of like, "Oh, just get your weight back," you hear that still. And, when I started riding mountain bikes in the '90s, we had the bikes back then, like, to not just go flying over the handlebars, you really had to ride them out the back of the bike because they were small wheels, very close together, steep head angles, so you rode them very far back just because they were an endo machine. Modern bikes, we ride them way more in the center of the bike, like kinda in the bike rather than off the back. So, I would say that the biggest one of the biggest, like, changes that most people will make is to think about a pattern of movement. So we think about like a full tall neutral position or like tall like a giraffe, arms and knees just slightly bent, chin over stem, level pedals. And then from that super tall default position, like how do you move to get lower? And so I typically tell people you got three joints you're gonna bend. You got your elbows, your hips, and your knees. And so as you go from full tall giraffe and you want to start getting lower, like start with your hips and your elbows first. And then, once you get your chest closer to the bars, then, or chin closer to the bars, then you bring in your knees later. So, you kind of like look more like a speed skater than you do a goalkeeper would be
Yeah. Yeah.
the analogy of that. So just getting people to good learn that movement pattern, and then, or other coaches will call that like the high hinge position. It's basically like, you're hinged forward, elbows bent, but your knees are more straight. So yeah, a lot of people just bend their knees and then that makes or bend their knees first, and that makes the front of the bike more vague, not as much pressure on the front tire, so braking is worse, steering is worse. They're very
Mhm.
passive, like, they're just kinda following the bike along and reacting to what happens, and if they're in that, like, better movement pattern, looking a little more like a speed skater, then they're able to be more of a driver of the bike and, anticipate, forces and movement and stay centered and move the bike to anticipate all that, so that's
When you're oh, sorry, go ahead.
good. So that's one of the biggest ones, probably the most common.
So do you find like, you're coaching on, you mentioned terrain a little bit earlier of like, the different areas of the world that you could be coaching in, like, Pisgah National Forest, North Carolina. And so is there anything that is like, you see you coach more in that area versus other parts of the world?
Yeah, I would say, so I travel a fair amount to teach these GSMBC courses around the United States.
Yeah.
And that's fun. Like we have quite varied terrain around, the States, right? So, from, the East here, kind of dense forest with a lot of black loamy dirt. We get a lot of moisture here and rain and stuff like that. But pretty good sized mountains. And then, so like the longest downhills here are over 1,000 meters or 3 to 4,000 feet of downhill on one trail, which is like pretty
Uh-huh.
amazing. Most of the time we're dealing with like yeah, shorter, sort of 500 to 1,000 feet of 300 meters, I guess, of like descending. But then I get to go other places and teach in the Rocky Mountain West or the desert Southwest or you know Pacific Northwest or like all those kinds of places, and we'd see a little bit different types of terrain. So I'd say like, I mean, here specifically, we have a lot of pretty rugged and old trails that are like tree roots are a main feature. So tech that
Yeah,
tree roots. Whereas if you go to like, desert Southwest or something, right, you're mostly dealing with like sandstone rock slabs and, that kind of world, right? So, I'd say that in general, like the specific techniques for, those different environments are going to change a little bit. But most of it is like, I guess an analogy I draw to that is like snow skiing or snowboarding, right? Is like if you didn't know anything about skiing or snowboarding, you might think that all snow is the same. Like you're doing the same thing on all snow. It all looks the same. But when you get into it, you're like, oh, well, I got to learn how to make turns on groomers. I got to make turns in powder, deep powder, crust. Like all kinds of different snow conditions, right? Slightly different techniques. So I feel like that's similar in the mountain bike world that we have different. We have moon dust in parts of the world, and that's like super dry, and that's weird. Some rocks, like you go to Bentonville, Arkansas, like don't trust any of the rocks, like they're all slippery. You
right.
go to, BC, like Squamish world, like the Whistler world, like the rocks are grippy and there's lots of cool slab riding, that kind of thing. So that's kind of what I think about that.
Yeah, I love the analogy too of like the ski to mountain bike analogy that you made there, where it's like the spring skiing conditions versus powder versus crud versus whatever.
Hmm.
And what I always think, or what I used to think, is when I was like cared about. Well, obviously, I'd love to have a great ski day, and I'd like to ski my best if I'm out there. I'd like to mountain bike my best if I'm out there. But like in the ski days, I'm like, these conditions wouldn't permit me to show off my best skiing. And I guess, do you see that a little bit on the mountain bike world, like where people show up and they're like, "Oh, this is so much different than what I'm used to."
Oh, for sure. Well, I mean, I experienced that myself when I was, just like, let's say going to Whistler to do, to be a student on coach courses, like the level 4
Right.
course kind of thing is like, I show up in Whistler and it's a different environment than what I'm used to. And so, it took me a while to get used to riding in Whistler, because it's different than what I've got, the conditions that I have at home. So, but I find that all the time. I mean, from the racing days, when I was traveling quite a bit around the world to race, like cross country races, and I did a lot of like multi-day stage races and long format, like marathon type mountain bike marathon type races. Um, yeah, like you'd have the racers that you kind of learn different conditions. So like let's say, I mean, even like World Cup downhill, you have certain riders that are very used to and excel in riding in muddy conditions, and certain
Yeah.
riders that do really well and excel in dry conditions. And that's just kind of like maybe a product of what they have done the most, or are the most familiar with. So
Yeah.
um
So then that's actually kind of an interesting kind of thought, because we have level 4 coaches, but then should you almost have regional specialists? It's like, imagine there was like a list of like check marks and like, yeah, you're like you're a pro in like Moab, or something like that.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think the skills are universal. So, how you apply them for different terrain is, maybe situational or specific, but I think the skills are all universal. So, um, yeah, a good coach can be able to adapt the universal set of skills and teaching to be able to, for a specific outcome or a specific environment. So, I think that's not too hard to do.
Yeah. Like, so you talked about like multi-day stage races and stuff like that, and you're in ice climbing guide, and
Yeah.
are you still actively ice climbing? Are you still guiding in the ice climbing world?
Yeah, so I mean, a quick background is that I grew up here in North Carolina, in the mountains of North Carolina, and I started mountain biking like pretty early, and got into mountain bike racing pretty early, and so I built up through that pretty quickly as a teenager, and started racing with the U.S. national team, and raced as a professional cross country racer. I was a junior national cross country champion in the '90s at one point, and then got into more of like the World Cup cross country kind of world. And this is back when early days of mountain biking, having a World Cup and being in the Olympics for the first time in '96. I never made it to the Olympics, but I did get to go to, like several world championships and that kind of thing. Unfortunately, the end of as mountain biking became more of a global thing in the '90s, that was also a bad time for performance enhancing drugs and cycling, international
Yeah.
cycling. And so I got to the point essentially in that world where I was like, I needed to make a decision whether I wanted to be a doper or not. I decided to stop racing and quit, and rather than make that decision. I was like at that point where I, was, wasn't achieving a whole lot of success at the world level. And, I was kind of a back of the pack kind of racer. And so then, options are limited. So,
Yeah.
for career paths at that point. So I jumped out of it. And then after that went into more outdoor education and mountain guiding world. So,
Right.
so I started guiding rock climbing and guiding mountaineering trips and guiding outdoor education kind of backpacking trips for Outward Bound and Knowles and those kinds of things. So I did that full time for a while, and got way into that where I was like guiding. I guided a fair amount in Alaska on Denali and two of the other seven summits, Kilimanjaro and Aconcagua, and guided a lot in Patagonia and that sort of thing. So I did that for a while, and then eventually got sick of 300 nights a year in a sleeping bag kind of world on 5 week long expeditions.
Yeah.
And then got out of that and then got back into racing again, actually. So it cleaned up at that point and started racing a bunch again. And then that time, like I moved away from doing like the, XCO sort of shorter course cross country stuff to more adventure, longer stage races and marathon stuff. I was the USA Marathon National Champion one year. So got to do a lot of that kind of stuff. And I raced a lot of cyclocross also. So that was during, yeah, I guess like that was super fun to be able to do a lot of UCI races and go to Europe and race World Cups and things like that.
Yeah.
Um so that whole scene, I'd say these days, I'm retired from racing. I do a few gravity races, like some enduros and downhills, and then coach full time year round for about the last 10 years. But I still try to stay connected to the guiding scene a little bit. So I'll guide rock climbing and guide ice climbing as my hobby job.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
something that's not bikes, because
Yeah.
everything else is so much bikes. So it's probably only during the summer guide rock climbing, like maybe one day a month, and then during the winter here, when the ice comes in here in North Carolina, yeah, who knew there? Most people don't know that there can be really good ice climbing here in North Carolina. It's got to get cold enough. It doesn't get cold enough very often, but when it does, I'll guide ice climbing here. I used to go back before my business was more would sustain itself through the winter, would get real quiet in the winter. So I would jump ship here and then go guide ice climbing somewhere else. Like I'd go to Colorado or to New Hampshire and guide ice climbing for a couple months in the dead part of the season, and then come back and work bikes for the rest of the year. So,
Yeah. Well,
but
that's
the bike business now, like we do fine. Like we make plenty. Like we're doing well enough that I don't need to like seek another job in the middle of the winter. So that's
yeah.
good.
Well, that's fantastic news too. But like, so uh, with these like larger like alpine ascents, so like these, if you're talking about Denali and stuff, like this is like
Yeah.
the expedition mindset, right?
Yeah.
So what is it that you liked about these expeditions? Like, you're an adventurous guy, obviously.
Yeah, I'd say it's just the adventure and exploration and then I guess the craft of it, there's a lot of craftsmanship of how to do that well and take care of yourself and take care of each other and guide and facilitate other people learning those skills and taking care of themselves. And then life is real simple when you're on an expedition like that. You're not thinking too much about what else is going on in the world. You're almost every minute of your day is like occupied with the task at hand, like just like cooking and moving and just taking care of yourself and getting from one place to another and navigating and dealing with the weather and like all the things. So you tend to stay pretty occupied that way. So
Yeah.
it's fun,
It's kind of
like adventure like that, but then also like teach other people how to do it.
it's kind of like the opposite of being in an airport. It's like, and what I mean by that, like, I used to do a lot of mountain climbing as well. I've been around, I lived in Banff for a few years and I used to climb all around the Bow Valley there. And
Sweet.
I loved the simplicity, like you're saying, of being
Mhm.
out in the mountains and really the survival kind of aspect of it. Because when you do that too, it gives you like a frame, it gives you like a reference for regular life, like, being in an airport, like there's food around you and like you're you're safe and it's all good, like, everybody's like just kind of walking around doing their thing, whereas like, you're out on a mountain and it's like you have to think about the weather, you have to think about like, not getting stuck out there, are you going to run into water, like all this kind of stuff, and like how much time do you have, I guess, if something did go wrong.
Mhm.
The simplicity of it is nice, and I think it does give you a nice frame for like, regular life.
Yeah. Well, and I relate that to mountain biking in a way of like, okay, so, I'm, full time. I teach people, mountain bike skills, right? And that in itself, like, I love it when people ride their bike better, but the real reason that I'm excited about it is how it transfers to the rest of their life. So the skills that, for mountain, like mountain climbing or mountain expeditions, and mountain biking in general, are similar in the way that, the folks are, specifically for skills instruction, the things that they learn in a controlled environment to be dedicated to a process of improvement. They're going to challenge themselves. They're going to learn how they deal with challenge and how they deal with success and failure. And the skills that they learn like through that are transferable to the rest of their life. So the next time that they're faced with a big challenge in life that might be out of their control, they might have learned a process through being dedicated to improvement on the mountain bike that would they could draw on to, like, oh, this is kind of like that. It's like, oh, well, don't think about the big picture, think about small steps, and like, those kinds of like transference pieces I think are, it improves people's lives, like, more than just like being able to do cool tricks now on your bike. Like, how does that help you be a better person, be better in your, with your friends and family and your business and whatever, work life, all that kind of thing. So that's
Yeah,
important.
and I totally agree, like, with that, and I think that, this going on a ride and then evaluating terrain and evaluating, like, the, risk sort of reward balance of certain things, like, it's almost like a micro sort of version of, I guess, life. Like, that might be a little too, like, grand of a statement, but I think that, definitely you start to make those, like, little decisions, but you realize, like, how, that, like, risk sort of balance is an important kind of decision-making framework.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Just even that alone, right? Yeah. Um, Consequence versus reward, calculus all the time. Yeah. Is definitely a neat thing to learn. 'Cause, some people are going to be more risk averse, or not. And so then,
Yeah.
yeah, learning how to make smart decisions with that is
So
interesting.
so, I also kind of looking into your background on how, you're an artistic guy. I'd love for you to explain it to me a little bit deeper, but, like, it's a pretty decent rig of basically, you know what I'm talking about now, right? Yeah, here you go.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, the fixed line here. Could you walk me through this?
This is
Because this
funny.
is
Okay.
super detailed. This is nice.
Right. So this came from the time when I worked for the North Carolina Hour School, and I was the chief climbing instructor for the whole school. So that,
Yeah,
folks, I don't know if folks are real familiar with Hour in general, but they do expedition learning for teenagers, basically. So, a typical hour course would be like teenagers going on long expedition trips, a week to 3 or 5 weeks, and then multi-element adventure stuff. So they could be backpacking, and doing some rock climbing and whitewater paddling, or they could be like, there's other element. They could be like, sailing or paddling, or that kind of thing, or it could be a river expedition. Anyway, so at the North Carolina Outbound School, I was the chief climbing instructor, and so we had this whole rock climbing program. And so I was in charge of staff training for the general staff and for the other climbing staff. And so back then, this was in was is that says 2003 on it. So back then,
nice.
I was, that was, the way the staff manual, I was in charge of like training staff to be able to set up different climbing sites. So this particular one, at Table Rock and here in North Carolina, had this fixed line that we would travel students along. They might do like a multi-pitch rock route up to the bottom of this fixed line, and then the other staff were in charge of like setting up this fixed line and then moving students along this fixed line to get up to the summit.
Right.
And so then the best way it seemed like to train people was like make this drawing so that they could go to the site and be have all the stuff and then just follow the illustration. um, there's a couple of books. This is inspired really. There's an author named Mike Clellan who draws cartoon like drawings like this for rock climbing instruction. There's a bunch of books. So like there may be like How to Rock Climb series or
Right.
um, like those kind of like real classic rock climbing books. Like all those illustrations on there were from this artist named Mike Clellan. So this was like inspired by his stuff. So yeah, so that's the story of that.
Yeah, that's pretty
Um,
cool. I have another one here for you too that I thought was pretty cool. So here's the other one. And I you put in the like literally put in all of the lines on the rope
yeah.
to like yeah, as a yeah. This was very intricate and like quite incredibly done, like even with the figure eight and stuff. So like I get the sense that you have this artistic streak, like not like you're very detail oriented and you're very like, literally drawing the figure eights into these kind of
Yeah.
diagrams.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, this particular one was an activity we would do with groups of students to cross this canyon, and so we would do this whole like Tyrolean traverse across this canyon. So yeah, it was always like a complicated rig to set up, and then so this was the drawing of how to set it all up, and yeah, that's pretty wild. Yeah, so that's a good observation actually, like how my brain works and the way that like I am like incredibly detail oriented. And so a continual challenge for me as a coach is to not get down the rabbit hole too much in detail and to
Right.
try to distill information into bite-sized chunks and then also summarize it enough that it's not too much. So um some students can love a lot of theory, love a lot of detail, and I'm like that when I'm learning stuff, like tell me more. Like like
Yeah.
all the details. I love it. Other students, like you talk too much and you lose them, right? Like get
Yeah.
more than 2 or 3 points and they're gone, right? So I think as a coach like that, and that's a continual challenge for me to be able to summarize and distill things down into bite-sized chunks that people can handle.
Yeah.
And the additional info when it's appropriate. So
Yeah, and
um
I find that, like, especially talking with coaches and also from my own experience, that especially with younger athletes, it's like you want to almost like figure out what's the right amount of information, not
yeah.
like here's everything. There's also this other idea of like distilling things down to sort of first principles. And I think once you're like, a little more mature as an athlete or a little more mature as like in whatever craft you're doing, having these like first principles and like so you can understand the basis for why things work, because then you
Uh-huh.
can adapt them to your own practice. So if I
Uh-huh.
understand that like the reason that I'm, putting my weight over top of the bottom bracket of the bike, like it has, in like light hands, heavy feet. If I'm understanding the reason behind that, and the actual like bike, is going to be an easier move and it's going to like self correct and that sort of stuff, then like maybe that cue does work for me, but maybe I can like adapt it in a slightly different way that's going to work for me as well. It's very personalized, right? And like with these like sort of visual representations, so these things, these drawings, uh, to me, it's like I see that there's a natural evolution from these drawings to a visual learning version of like video. Like here's a video of you, like, so is that something you think about as well? Do you think that do you think these are closely related in any way?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's related to sports sense. I definitely love using the sports sense tool as a teaching aid in person with people, and then also remote, remotely as well. But that allows me to get super detail oriented with feedback and analysis. So when I can record, like let's say if we're at practice time, taught something, we're practicing it, I'm watching the client do the thing. If they ride by in real time, I have one shot to see them and to be able to like glean a lot of information, right?
Right.
If I record them as they ride by, then suddenly now I've got this tool where I can watch it over and over again myself. And I can look at different things each time. So
Yeah.
I might get their, what their knees look like, or what their, what their where their elbows are, or I might look at what their suspension looks like when they impact something. But I can look at different things and different passes, and I can even slow it down. Right, I can run it in slow motion or frame by frame. So that's just like a tool for me as a coach to be able to gather more information more completely, but then also then be able to then, okay, now I'm going to take the same video, show it to the client in real time, and and say like, okay, I can point out to those little specific things. I can draw on it and like, okay, your elbows in here at this spot on the trail, like try to have your elbows like 2 inches farther forward right here. Okay. And here's why. So it's just a nice tool to be able to be super detail oriented when I'm teaching, both for me to get every information and then also portray that information to other folks for sure.
Yeah. And so were you using video before you were using sports sense? And like, was that like a good objective thing for you to give to clients?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'd say you just using like the native video stuff, like an iPhone and in GoPro and stuff like that. But
Do you notice
I'm
there's faster learning? Like, do you notice that when you show somebody like, hey, you're actually doing this, do you notice that like things click for them?
Yeah, I would say so. That in general, that we think about the different ways that we learn, and sort of audio and visual, kinesthetic, kind of like different, the classic like learning styles. The more that we can enhance all of those, the more completely that someone is going to learn something. It's obvious that
Yeah.
some folks will connect with the video stuff, like visual, way more than they will, like let's say, you just like auditory learning, or other people just don't connect with it as much. So I think part of a good coach can pay attention to how the client or student is learning and then adapt their teaching style to be able to better match the preferred way that they're learning. So if they're really geeking out on the video stuff, then yeah, I'll use more of it.
Right.
And if they don't seem to be getting much out of it and want to like see me do a demo, or they want to like discuss theory of why they should do it some other way, then like I'm happy to do that. Just kind of adapt. Um,
Yeah.
but I think it overall, like if you can, yeah, like provide a learning in different, yeah, to accommodate all those learning styles, then people are going to learn it more completely. So.
Yeah. So before we get too far away from the whole like alpine and ice climbing stuff, how does the pump like in your forearms from a big mountain bike day versus like an ice climbing day? How do they differ or how are they the same?
Yeah, I'd say similar, just fatigue, right? Is that, you get that, you're going along downhill, and you're, yeah, you just get that fatigue and that kind of like, that weird muscle pump where your muscles, the forearms and your hands and then things like that are just like hard, it's like, and I think that part of that is, I don't know what's going on physiologically there, but for like ice climbing, and climbing, it's a similar kind of fatigue profile. It's maybe exacerbated when you're ice climbing because you're cold. So then your body like doesn't promote blood flow when it's cold to the extremities. And so when your hands get cold in ice climbing, then, you have less blood flow, and then your forearms get more tired because you're, like climbing on them. And so it exacerbates it for sure. Um, yeah, I'd say it feels sort of similar, although you get the crazy ice climbing. There's this phenomenon in ice climbing called the screaming barfies.
Yeah, yeah, I'm familiar. So, yeah. Yeah.
So for our audience that don't know, is like your hands or your feet. You maybe have experienced this, and people have experienced in their feet get really cold, and so then essentially like your body's not, shunting blood away from your extremities. You're not getting a lot of blood flow, and the actual temperature of the extremities goes down. And then when it starts to warm back up, like warm, the blood starts to get flowing back out to there. Then there's some nerve pain from that return of warming. Your hands go numb from being cold, and then when they start to come back, they can be really painful. And they're called screaming barfies because it's so painful. It's like, you want to scream and barf at the same time. So
Yeah.
I've not experienced the screaming barfies on mountain bike, except for maybe like super cold feet from like a cyclocross race or something. But so
Yeah, yeah, like I remember hearing one of the Screaming Barfies like years ago, and I was like, that is the silliest name for anything. I don't care what it is. I was like, that is such a silly name. But I guess it makes sense if that's exactly what so,
What it feels like.
yeah,
You'll see somebody like, yeah, they'll be like doubled over just like, "Ah,"
yeah,
like, "Why
yeah.
so much?" You know? Like,
Yeah,
that's
and the interesting technique too of like, if your hands are cold or whatever, trying to get blood back into your hands by like swinging
mhm,
them, and then that's like interesting techniques you can pick up and like pull across between the two of them. And then like I noticed when I was rock climbing and mountain biking, that was where my grip, like my especially my grip endurance really like jumped up from being
uh-huh,
like I was having days where I'd be in the bike park, where I'd be like, yeah, I could barely hold my bike, like whatever. To
uh-huh,
now I'm foam grips now. I don't
uh-huh,
like no gloves. I just liked a little bit more for whatever reason. I've just like tried to put gloves on, and I've just like never really gotten used to it, and never really adapted to it fully. But when I was climbing and mountain biking at the
uh-huh,
same time, it's like I've built up this like what feels like a really solid like base of sort of like forearm strength. There's two different things at play there. Like when you're looking at the way that people climb versus whatever, there's like more active sort of pulling motion of climbing, which might be the same as, or is going to be the same as ice climbing, versus a more like sort of eccentric kind of like static, just like reactive force of riding it. So you're kind of hitting the muscle in a lot of ways.
mhm, yeah.
I don't know if you see something similar.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Well, I mean, I think, that kind of like arm pump or hand fatigue when riding downhill is a thing that a lot of people experience, right? So I think we can approach that in two ways. One is through more efficient skill. So, can we adapt our riding style or riding skill to be able to not put as much load on our grip strength or our forearms or that sort of thing to be able
Yeah.
to, yeah, be more efficient. So we can absolutely approach it that way. And we can also approach it from a fitness standpoint of, and so for instance, like when you're talking about that crossover of climbing, like some of the World Cup downhill guys that live around and girls that live around this area, like it's pretty common here in the off season that for fun, like they're making regular trips to the climbing gym.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like a, cross training in a way. But they say that it helps with, exactly what you're talking about. Like there's that kind of like
Mhm.
crimp strength, grip strength kind of thing. So it's
The
kind of cool to see some crossover.
like so you talked a little bit about here, I thought it was kind of interesting was the performance enhancing drug era of like the 90s of
Mm,
mountain biking. And my for myself actually, like when I was an athlete, there was the direct sort of issue that I was dealing with around that time was there was a speed skater who was um, he was like winning everything, and he actually got caught twice with two different doping infractions. And then I
mhm,
was also a big track and field fan, and I was watching like Justin Gatlin get caught, for doping, and
mhm,
then obviously Lance Armstrong and like all this stuff kind of coming through. Looking at performance enhancing drugs, and like there's this frustration that comes with being an athlete that's like
mm,
not taking in performance enhancing drugs, and everyone else is taking it. But what was interesting to hear you say is that like you kind of had to make that decision of like, am I going to take performance enhancing drugs or not? And that's the only way I could be competitive.
right. Yeah, or at least, yeah, I'd say that, yeah, it was maybe not the only, or at least it seemed like an unfair advantage to, yeah, that I was losing, right? So,
Right.
or I don't think in hindsight, like, I feel like I used that decision of like to stop racing at that point as like I used the performance enhancing drug kind of like issue as maybe a final reason to stop racing at that point. I think that I'd gotten to the point of like I was realized that I wasn't going to be able to make a living doing it in a meaningful way, and
Right.
so I needed to do something else, right? To like it was going to be harder and harder to get contracts to get paid, and so I needed to pursue something else. And but I think that so there was definitely like I wasn't quite as talented enough, even if we were a level playing field and no one was doping, like um I probably wouldn't have been able to do it. So or able to compete at that level.
Yeah.
However, like then the doping thing just makes it worse, right? It's like, okay, well, if I'm not gonna be a doper, then I'm gonna be extra far behind.
Yeah.
So that's
Like
kind of
I've sort of gone down the rabbit hole of like the like in different times of looking at performance enhancing drugs, and like
mm,
where do you draw the line?
oh for sure.
Because you can pull it obviously, like people will go steroids bad. Like that's that's kind of general overarching theme in like mainstream sort of media and like people see it. But there's so much nuance to it. And you look at what every like, different countries are doing, especially like you looked at like what Russia is doing, and they're not even allowed to compete at the Olympics. Like they have a separate sort of entity that compete in the Olympics now because they have these systematized doping programs where they'll literally like push the boundary. Every time that the doping programs catch up to what they're doing, they're already ahead of it by a little bit more. They have the new thing or whatever it is. And there's more money in winning than there is in catching athletes for doping.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you're hitting the nail on the head with that, yeah, the dopers are always kind of, or the good is the doping science is always one step ahead of the doping detection, right? It's like and that's how it has to be. I mean, yeah, but then the fine line between what's okay and what's not okay, yeah, it's really tricky. There's a gray area, and there's like probably stuff that you obviously would say is wrong, and then but then there's going to be a gray area as well. Yeah, that's tricky. Yeah, I don't know, I feel like stuff's like way cleaner than it used to be, especially in cycling world. There's definitely like doping positives that still come through the system, but it's not like a systematic approach to the entire sport anymore. It's like,
Yeah.
it's, or maybe I'm naive and I don't see it, but I feel like it's, yeah, pretty dang clean these days.
Well, have you seen it's like the enhanced games or whatever they're called?
Oh yeah, yeah, the
Yeah.
enhanced game.
It's
Yeah,
where it's
what
like
kind?
anything goes. Just like, like get as much EPO and steroids and everything and like throw it all in your system and just like see how, what you can compete at it.
What you
I
can
haven't done
do.
much more looking into just like understanding the concept of it, but like the enhanced games, right? Like get these mutants out there competing against each other.
Yeah, that's wild. Well, and I thought about that a little bit, back then when I made that decision to stop because of doping. It was kind of like, I'd put so much effort in my life into, trying to get to be able to compete at the highest level in the world, and the analogy I used with it was kind of like, you're into like Olympic wrestling, right? So, you're come up through the ranks and then you get into like, World Cup wrestling or something, and you walk into your first match and then you realize it's like, you know, like, fake professional wrestling, like WWE or something like that. Like you walk in and
Yeah.
like, Hulk Hogan or, I don't know, the famous, like, big, those kinds of characters. And you're like, wait a minute,
Yeah.
this is different than I had thought it was going to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sport that I signed up for. This is like some other show that I'm not, that I don't connect with. Like what's going on here? So that's kind of like what what I thought about at that point is like, I don't even know if I want to be part of this like just junk show. So,
Right. Right. Yeah. And it's like, it definitely like brings the focus back to, I think, in certain sports, you can be a little bit immune from the performance enhancing drug stuff because there's these pure athletic sports, like, talking about like track and field, for example,
Mhm.
where you're gonna, you had like the doping era of like, what was it, like the 70s, 80s, where there was all these records that were just set because it was like, it mattered so physical performance mattered so much more than like the technique that you were putting down. Right.
Right.
So the technique in a way acts as a bit of a filter for performance enhancing drugs. The more technical a sport, the less likely you're going to be uh,
Mm.
good. The less likely performance enhancing drugs will um, help you. But that being said, there's other things that are going to help. Like maybe it's like nootropics or things that are like mind enhancing, it's focus enhancing in some ways.
Mhm. Yeah, and, you think about, well, I mean, there's definitely like commonly accepted performance enhancing drugs that we use to our advantage. Like, like caffeine is has like creatine, things like that that
Yeah.
are substances that you would take to enhance your performance that are widely accepted. I think that, and there actually used to be a level of caffeine that was unacceptable. Like, I think there was a
Right.
up
Yeah. I
limit.
remember this. Yeah.
Um, did away with that at some point. But I think that part of it was I guess like, like they're trying to judge like what are the risks of, of taking these substances or, and judging it somewhat on that too.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's kind of funny, like, oh, okay, well, caffeine and creatine are like very well studied and very well understood to be performance enhancing. So, but
Yeah,
it's okay.
I love that you brought that up. I remember that. I remember them saying, at one point I was competing and they were like, "Oh yeah, like you can take caffeine, it's totally fine, but above a certain threshold, it's considered performance enhancing." Like
Right.
think about it. That's like a couple of cups of coffee. and you're like, you're getting the same infraction as somebody who potentially is doing steroids for, that could be like, that's why it's so gray, right? Like, I think
Yeah.
it's important for people to understand like how gray the line sort of is. Like, these standards are constantly changing, and there's constantly new banned substance coming out. They're adapting things, and they're saying like it's not just like it's not black and white.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think that the level of caffeine was like you had to be like injecting, an intravenous caffeine or something to like achieve that level. Like it was some kind of ridiculous. Were you a part of or your program with speed skating and stuff? Did you have like the registered testing pool where they would like
Yeah,
you had to like update your whereabouts and have like that whole scene? Yeah. So
exactly.
do you yeah, when I came back to racing again, that I was a part of that program where we were sort of like under more scrutiny by U.S. anti-doping, and then so we had the like the phone app where you had to like update your whereabouts, and they every day basically, and then they could come and do these random tests on you, and and you would end up getting tested like way more often, and then there's all the fear of like accidentally ingesting things that you didn't even know
Oh
you
yeah.
getting busted for it. It's like trying to be really careful with supplements and like all that kind of thing
Yeah.
is wild.
Yeah,
Um,
we had our sort of testing and stuff, but again, it's so much more complex and nuanced than like a lot of people realize, and you just don't know what everyone else is taking. So like, how are you supposed to? It's a really difficult decision without all the variables to totally understand. Focusing back on like the technique stuff, and we were talking about video a little bit earlier, and this like people are trying to make videos online these days. Like they're trying to make like stuff and go like, here's the how-to video on whatever insert skill here, but like,
uh-huh.
what's missing from that whole equation?
Yeah, yeah. I think there is a lot of content out there that takes like very advanced maneuvers or advanced things and then breaks them down into parts. It's okay, like, oh, to accomplish this trick, we're going to do a big whip. All right. So how do we do a big whip? All right. Here are all the parts. All right. And break it down into the different parts. Um, and that looks good on, short form socials and things like that, like, oh, it's, dude's doing a sick whip and this girl's like throwing this awesome whip and she's doing, like, and here are all the parts to it. However, I think that, what breaks down is like there's like when people go out to, try to do it, then it's like if they know all the parts, are they able to do those parts, right? So oftentimes no, just by watching the video and then understanding what the parts are, it doesn't necessarily mean that I can accomplish those tasks. And so if I don't have those, if I can't do those things, then how do I get there? And so that's where like a good coach can, okay, well, if you doing a whip is like an outcome that you want to achieve, then here's all the like foundational stuff that we need to work on stepwise, to get to be able to do some of those parts. And then it's certainly like along the way. And so not only designing like the stepwise progression to acquire those skills, but then along the way, the just sort of analysis and feedback of, you think you're doing something a certain way, but a good coach will be able to be like, well, no, actually, like, check out this video that I took of you doing it. Like, you're actually not doing it the way that you think you are. Like you could improve by doing it this way.
Right.
um, so yeah, so I
So I
see
hear
that.
too.
What's that?
And I hear two things there where it's like you might have this sort of you're missing the feedback loop of like, okay, now like here's how to do something, and then somebody tries it, like making adjustments, like an over, like, there's
Hmm.
an iteration phase to it. But then there's
Hmm.
also like the other part pieces, like maybe this try it once and fail culture sort of thing.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I think that's kind of the magic of a coach in a lot of ways is that we know how to, if you have an outcome of wanting to do a specific thing or ride a specific feature or on the trail or do a kind of certain kind of trick or something, then like rarely are we gonna go directly to that feature. Like, let's say if you come to me and you say like, my big goal is I want to ride that big drop on Dirt Merchant Pro Line or something, right? So
Yeah.
um then very rarely am I gonna well, never am I gonna just go straight there and like, well, let's start working on it. Like if you've never done it before, right? Like we're not just gonna start riding it. And so that's kind of like what those videos are, like you probably find a video that breaks down like exactly how to ride that drop. Okay, but does that mean you're just gonna start doing it? And it's like, no. Okay, you're gonna okay. Let's see. How can we build skills, the foundation and the parts and the pieces, so that you can eventually build up to being able to do that confidently. So we're gonna go, work on other parts of it that might not involve any kind of drop at all at first, and and then work up through, repetition experience and acquisition of skills and like all that kind of feedback and analysis and all that kind of thing. And eventually, you may be able to get to that, to be able to ride that thing. Maybe not that day. And most commonly it's probably going to be like a long time to get there. It depends on how close you are to doing it anyway. So anyway, so yeah, that's I see that quite a lot, that we're not going to go start on that specific feature. We're going to, and a coach can build up your ability to help you on the path to doing that feature without necessarily putting you in danger of, because if we went straight there and started riding it, it's like, well, why don't you try and see what happens? Like there's consequence to that drop. so
Yeah.
so it's way better, like way safer, right? When you arrive there, that you're ready, that you're confident, that you're like, I'm sure that you're going to do it 10 out of 10 times, and that's the right place for us to be. Whereas if we went straight there, I'd be like, I don't know, maybe you'll do it, maybe you won't, maybe you'll die. I don't know, like crash and burn into that pile of alligators down there. I don't know. Um,
Well,
yeah,
undoubtedly, if you had some sort of feature that went over a pile of alligators, that would get a ton of likes on social media. I can guarantee
right.
that. So,
Venomous.
with like coaching, and imagine we went back into like a totally digital world again. So if like COVID hits 2.0 and like we all have to go back, what parts of coaching would still stick around? Like what things would you still have to be like, these have to be consistent?
Hmm.
And we like, so we can't connect with people, I guess, to be clear. Like, so I can't physically go somewhere and like, uh, be with someone.
Yeah. Well, we're doing more of that now with like, with better technology like sportsense to be able to do remote skills coaching. So I can work with athletes, not even in person. Um, the it's uh so, how do we do that? And it's like basically like, they could record video of them doing things, and then I could, give feedback on it, and they could go out and try again and record video again. Um, we might even be able to do some live stuff, through, any of the kind of like live video, stuff like FaceTime, or I don't know, could you do it
Yeah.
through a Google Meet or something? Like, I don't know, like there could be something like that. Um, I find that so I'm starting to do a little bit of that, mostly with repeat clients. So basically, like I'll work with someone in person, and then we have the SportSense app, and I share all their videos and stuff with them, and then I send them home with homework. Okay, like go home and do these drills.
All right.
All right, now after you do that for a couple of months and you're starting to get bored, record yourself doing these things, put it back in the SportSense folder in the share feed, and then ping me and let me know that you've done that. And then I'll go in, I'll look at it, and I'll give you feedback, remotely, of, to give you feedback on how you're progressing with those things that I assigned to you earlier. So I like it as a follow-up tool, for people to kind of check their progress as they're going. Because like in an in-person coaching session, we often see like good progression from riders improve right away, but oftentimes they make a lot more improvement as they practice later. Through lots of practice later on. So then it's nice to be able to check up on that. So
Yeah.
yeah. So I see like some of the technology now is getting pretty good for that.
Do you see that there's maybe a shift from like more like this is how things feel to like more objective feedback?
Hmm. How things feel versus objective feedback. Tell me more about that.
So I think just like you look at the, creating standards for people. So, we talked a little bit about with you today about like, breaking skills down into like their component parts and like,
Mhm.
first principles, that sort of stuff. But is it more, so, and you've also talked about like, really batching something into like, heavy feet, for example. It's like
Mm.
those are kind of two sort of, let's call it not conflicting ideas, but there's like a cue versus like the actual, like these are the component parts. And then, if you look at video, then it goes, this is like objectively what you're doing versus like,
I
saying like, how does this feel compared to you? Like, do you see coaching trending in either direction or do you think it's a mix of both or what do you feel like?
Yeah, I just see them as different tools and you working with what's available to me as a coach or what works with the rider. So I love giving cues and helping riders to be able to learn what to do or know that they're doing the right thing by the way things feel. So for instance, like we talked a little bit about like, paying attention to what the pressure in their feet or their hands or um those kinds of outcomes like or like they're paying attention to different sensory things as they ride. um I love it when we can use those tools to for a rider to feel when they're doing it well and then have targets for what it should feel like. um for me as a coach, like I can't unless I put sensors in their shoes or something, like I can't tell when they're feeling the right thing. The tool that I have is what they look like. Like I can see, so I might be able to see what they look like when they're doing it correctly. So let's say like maybe the cue is like for the rider is that they're riding along with level pedals and they're going to do like let's say they're going to do a bunny hop or a level lift or something like that, and then it's like, I'll get them to like just in a big open space, like ride along. And then when you have like really equal pressure between both of your feet, then do your press through your feet. Like, but don't press through your feet until you are like absolutely sure that you've got like even pressure through both of them. Okay, so that gives them then they're like riding along and feeling what their feet feel like. Oh, I've got like equal pressure. Go. Um, Now as a coach, when I'm watching that, I can't feel what they're feeling. But what I can see is like, to have equal pressure on their feet, their hips have to be like centered over top of the bottom bracket. Like their center of mass has to be directly over the bottom bracket. Like if they're too far back, their back foot's going to be pressured more than their front foot. If they're leaning too far forward, their front foot's going to be pressured more. I can see what it looks like when their feet aren't evenly distributed. But they can't necessarily see that themselves, right? They can't see their center of mass in relation to their feet, but I
Mhm.
can, right? So then I use a tool of like, okay, well, what does it feel like to them so that they can judge when that occurs.
Right.
Otherwise they're like, like trying to live stream a video of themselves riding along and trying to like look a certain way in a mirror, it's like, okay, well, that doesn't gonna work. So
Yeah.
just different tools. Yeah. Well, that's
Cool.
cool.
Man,
Yeah, good.
this was fun. This is a good chat. Really enjoyed this one.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, good. Thanks, buddy. I appreciate
Yeah.
it. Yeah. Sounds great.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Josh. This is awesome.